I'm about to interview DeWayne Fliss. As you're about to hear, he's got a really unique background, a really unique skill set. We're going to start off with his story at kind of top of his class, U of T, but we're going to go through kind of his career path and how, and this is what I want you to listen to, is how his career path led to where we are at with psychometric assessments and helping organizations become higher performing. Specifically, he has an academic background, but he has a business experience background as well. And again, pay attention to the insights that he provides as he shares different aspects of his story and in what he learned at different times, what he put into practice, and again, what difference that made to the organizations that he was part of. I'm excited about this. We are going to be doing 4 or 5 episodes here. We're going to probably roll with the punches as we go through this. But again, the first episode will be focused on DeWayne and his story. The second episode will focus on traits as a psychometric assessment tool and what role that plays in an organization, what role it should be playing in almost any organization. And then we're going to move into kind of a story of a few different companies and how those companies become better and using various tools, including traits, but what other tools are involved? What do organizations need at certain points in order to become the highest performing they can? All right, we are trying something new here, a series of videos with DeWayne Fliss. DeWayne is the founder of Concord, and it's going to be a lot of fun today. We are going to delve into your story a little bit, into traits, but then really the concept of this is flowing with the feel or the theme of this podcast, which is higher performing organizations. How do we perform better as an organization in general? So what I'm going to start off with, DeWayne, is your story. You have a fantastic story and in how Concord came about, but even before that, how you started to think differently about people and psychometrics.
Yeah. Well, I started off in civil engineering. And how do you end up in psychometrics and organizational behavior when you start off in civil engineering? And in the 5th year, we had this prof who taught us about industrial sociology. His name was Dr. Lawrence Peters. And so he taught us about industrial sociology. And what I remember mostly from that one semester course was this experiment in London, UK, where a bunch of scientists decided to change the level of lighting within a manufacturing plant to see whether or not it would increase productivity of the people on the work floor. And all I remember is that when the light went brighter, the productivity went higher. When the light went lower, the productivity went down. And I had never thought about this idea of the correlation between productivity and the environment and how you can change the environment and change productivity in some way. So that started to stimulate my thinking. I graduated and went to work for a public company in Toronto doing engineering work, structural engineering work. Did that for 2 years, and then this prof, Dr. Lawrence, called me and he said, "DeWayne, I'd like you to come back and do some graduate study." And I said, Dr. Lawrence, I didn't really like industrial sociology a whole bunch. And so what is it that you want me to do? He says, "Well, I'm doing this. I've got this course that I'm starting, and I want to put together organizational behavior and psychometrics. And you came out with a statistics major, so that's a really good sub-base for the psychometrics." And he said, "I know maybe you weren't impressed by the industrial sociology, but you did have a lot of really good questions about it. And so I wanted to find out whether or not you would be interested in coming and listening to the curriculum." And so I went downtown one day and had lunch with him, and we talked about it. And he persuaded me to go into some graduate study, which I did. So I signed up for it and spent 3 years studying organizational behavior and psychometrics, and that was kind of the beginning of my interest, and then knowledge, and then capability and skills, and kind of putting those two things together. So he was a pretty important man in my life. And then he was writing a book at the time, and if you ever do graduate study, and you have a prof who's writing a book, you become a kind of a research slave, whether you want to or not. And so he asked me if I would work with him on this project to do some research for his book as a background for his book. And I said, sure. What do you want me to do? And he said, well, I want you to go and talk to 100 different companies from Oshawa to Burlington and this Golden Horseshoe in Southern Ontario. And I want you to ask this question: why? What's the number one reason why employees leave your organization? And I said, okay. He said, but wait a minute. There's a couple of components here. People leave voluntarily because they think there's something else for them to do, or they have a reason for doing it. And people leave involuntarily, which means someone asked them to leave. I don't want to do any research on the involuntary. I really want to do research on the voluntary. Why did someone decide to leave this organization? So go and talk to these 100 companies and put all your data together and get it organized, and then come back and share the results with me. And I'm going to find a place to get that content into my book that I'm writing. So I did that. I went and talked to 100 companies, and those were the days before notebooks and computers. So this was all done in foolscap paper, big fat file, and had really good conversations. These organizations knew Dr. Lawrence, and they were quite willing to help him. And so when I showed up as a representative, they opened the door and gave me a lot of time and attention. So that took me about 3 months to do on a part-time basis, kind of, and got back to my lab with him and put this big fat file of papers in front of him, and he said, okay, Fliss, he always called me Fliss. He said, okay, Fliss, what's the number one reason why people leave organizations? And I said, because of their boss, what their boss does or doesn't do, what their boss says or doesn't say. And he said, that's very interesting. I said, there's lots of different pieces of those, but everything falls into one of those 4 categories. And he said, well, what about their colleagues? What about their compensation? And I said, well, what do you think was second on that list? And by the way, the first percentage of people was something like 78. So 78% of the people left because of what their boss said or didn't say or did or didn't do. And said the second reason was their colleagues, the people they were working with every day, and lack of relationship, or they felt that those people were not doing their job properly, or they weren't being tasked properly. So they decided that those individuals decided it's time for me to move on. And that, as I recall, that number was something like 14% or 15%.
Significantly different than the 78.
Yeah. And almost near the bottom of the list was compensation, which was, so the list was maybe 7 or 8 different things that people didn't like, that caused them to want to leave the organization. So today, when we think about that same idea, most of the time, we think that people leave their job because of compensation. We have this better opportunity to make more money. There's profit sharing, or there's some kind of incentive and reward for performance. And a lot of people are motivated by doing that. But that's what we hear, I think. And this research that I'm talking about happened decades ago. But having worked in the industry, in this consulting industry, for as long as I have now, I think if I was to do that research all over again and ask the same question all over again, I wouldn't be surprised to get quite similar results today. And that comes from just watching how people who are clients of ours, thousands of people that we've interacted with over the years, when they tell us they're leaving, and then they show up in a new place and call us and say, hey, we'd like you to come over here. And we have a chance to say to them, tell us why you left. What was going on? You seemed motivated, engaged. Why did you leave? Well, my boss and I were having this struggle. He wanted me to do this, or she wanted me to do that, and I didn't really agree with it. And so that kind of started a bit of a tension. And so it eventually led to me deciding they're not going to change. And so I need to leave. So I finished that project, that part of the project. And I brought those results back to Dr. Lawrence. Then he said, okay, I've got another research project for you, DeWayne. I said, oh, okay. And I had actually enjoyed that because I
Mhm.
learned so much talking to all of these managers and executives that had left the organization. And said, I want you to go back to 100 different organizations in that golden horseshoe from Oshawa to Burlington and Hamilton. And I want you to ask, um, why do people stay in their job? And I want you to ask people who have worked in the organization for more than 5 years. And I remember saying to Dr. Lawrence, well, why didn't you let me ask that question the first time when I was talking to all these people? And he said, DeWayne, you need to learn how to do research. You can't salt the data. You can't bring bias into
Mhm.
it. So you need to do these things separately and distinctly. So he was trying to teach me how to do research. And so I went back and spent another 3 months doing the same thing, asking people that were there for 5 years or longer. So why do you stay in your job? What is it that really motivates you to want to be here for 5 years and in many cases longer than that?
Mhm.
And the number one reason was my boss. What my boss does, what my boss doesn't do, what my boss says, what my boss doesn't say. So I thought, but that number now was 72% instead of 78%. So slightly less, but still significant majority of the people either left their organization or stayed in their organization because of their boss. And so that made me realize how important bosses were in the world, whether they were supervisors, managers, executives, owners, entrepreneurs. Um, and so that gave me a lot more energy and motivation to want to understand what's the difference between bosses who are able to retain and motivate people versus those who aren't. And so that created for me a really interesting research project that I did as part of my graduate studies. And so that's kind of how I got involved in this area of organizational behavior and psychometrics.
No, I wanna continue down the road of again this journey, but I want to go back just for a minute. Where were you in your career as an engineer when you went and
Hmm.
got this graduate degree?
I had spent a little over 2 years working for this company in Toronto at that point, and I was enjoying my work. They were actually they were a good company to work with. But this Dr. Lawrence just had he was a kind of a magnetic force in my life for that period of time, and when he suggested that this was something that he thought I would enjoy and do well at, he knew me enough that I believed him. I trusted him, and
Mhm.
so he kind of persuaded me to, and he paid me a small amount of money to do this research with him as well as he was writing his book, and so I wasn't penniless, but yeah, so I had a couple of years of engineering, real hard engineering work that I did that I learned and things that actually helped me further in my life in different career that I took on after that. Um, so that's one of the challenges when you graduate, especially at that point, with a organizational behavior and psychometrics graduate studies. What do you do in the world? There's like who's going to hire you? And I hadn't thought too much about that.
Mhm.
All I thought about was that this is really motivating, interesting for me, and I want to really dive deeply into it and really understand it. So I went back to the company that I had left, and they were quite welcome to hire me. So I spent another few years doing engineering work, and then they moved me into a management
Mhm.
and out into the field into Western Canada from Toronto. So my career started to evolve from that point into a different direction.
Now, with the engineering, you graduated top of your class
I did.
at University of Toronto,
I
correct?
did.
So you worked with a large public traded company, like you said, probably handpicked, correct? For that
Yes.
company?
Yes.
Okay. What was your experience like moving into the workforce? Because I know that you are a unique personality, and I'm curious about, and I've heard stories, but I want to hear it from you. What was that period of time like working for a very large company, being the kind of person that is very entrepreneurial?
Yeah. Maybe it wasn't the entrepreneurial part that was visible or that was problematic for me. It was the detail
Mm.
orientation part that was probably more problematic for me. I didn't know that I was lower in detail. And even after I finished my psychometrics and organizational behavior studies, I had some sense of that, but I didn't really understand how severe that was
Hmm.
actually in my life. So it took engineering work, not engineering study, engineering work. The study part, the academic part, I did quite easily and quite well. But the work of engineering, once I had to do that 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, I call it the DX over DY part of my life kind of a thing. Um, what I realized was that I was making some mistakes that were pretty critical, actually life threatening, if what I had done actually was built. So, for instance, I had a chief engineer who this company was national, so we were doing projects from Vancouver Island to Newfoundland. We had offices across the country, manufacturing plants, and construction crews in the field. And so he asked me to work on a project that the company was awarded in Vancouver. It was a multi-story building, four-story building. It was a commercial building, and it was all steel structure. And structural steel and statistics were my two majors, so it was kind of an appropriate fit for me. In those days, this was before we actually had software calculations. So you did everything by hand and by calculator and by slide rule almost kind of. So it was kind of funny because the way that engineering works is that you start from the bottom up. So you begin with the foundations, and then you start to put all the structure in place for the that hold up all the facility, and then you work through it floor by floor. So I did all of that, which took me about 4 or 5 weeks of design, and I had files of calculations and data inside there about the sizes of beams and how much wells and how many bolts and what kind of bolts they should have and what locations. And I came back to our chief engineer with this great big fat file. I put it on his desk and I said, here you go. You can take this to the shop and they can start to manufacture this. So he looked at the big file and he said, what seismic factor did you use for Vancouver? And I said, seismic factor? And he looked at me and he said, you know that Vancouver's in a seismic zone, DeWayne? And I said, oh, yeah, right. I remember now. So I had been born in Ontario, was educated in Ontario, had never been to Vancouver, had never done any work of any kind in Vancouver or British Columbia. And I remember studying seismic design. So seismic is how do earthquake forces change the design of a structure. And Vancouver, particularly, is the highest seismic zone factor in Canada. So here I had spent, all of this time working on all of the details for it, none of which was useful. I basically had to throw it away because you can't just factor things with seismic forces. You actually have to recalculate everything from scratch again. So he looked at me and he said, okay, you better do this over again. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, why did I miss that? Why did I forget? How did I miss seismic zone? One of the most important things in any kind of a British Columbia building design. And that's when I started to become aware of the fact that I could do engineering pretty well, but why was I missing that really important factor? And what would have happened if he didn't ask that question and it went to the shop and it got manufactured, then it got built? People would have died if there was an earthquake. And so I realized that that's a pretty serious responsibility. I ought to consider whether or not that's what I really want to be doing for the rest of my life. So that was the first time that I had that kind of a, I'm in trouble experience in my life.
And that was at the beginning of your career.
Yes.
I'm wondering, so fast forward a couple of years, now you get your graduate studies, you move back to this organization and you're in a management role. How did that suit you, better or worse? Again, I'm just I'm thinking through the steps that you went through
Mm-hmm.
to mature your understanding of how organizational behavior is affected by our psychology, by our personalities specifically.
So that incident of missing the seismic zone factor in the structural design became sort of public knowledge with the executive within about maybe 5 minutes of that meeting, I suspect. And they all thought, oh no, like here's a guy that we've been sort of grooming to become an important person in our business. They thought. I didn't know that, but that's what I learned after the fact. And so a few days after that, the general manager of this division, his name is Howard Dutton. Howard Dutton came into my office and he said, "How you doing, DeWayne?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing great, Howard. I'm really loving this stuff. It's really interesting design." He said, "How you doing, DeWayne?" And I said, "I think I screwed up big time." He said, "Yeah, I heard that." It was kind of like I'm going to be fired now. This is the moment in my life, and I'd never been fired before in my life. And I thought, better get ready for this because I hope this doesn't happen too often. He said that was unfortunate. He said, "But really, I'm here to ask you about something else." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "We have a job in Winnipeg. It's to be a district manager for Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Northwestern Ontario. And I'm wondering if you would be interested in moving to Winnipeg and becoming a district manager for us." I said, "Yeah. What's a district manager?" And he said, "Oh, I'll explain it to you. We have a job description." He said, "But if you're interested, we'll talk about it some more." And I said, "I'm interested." So 3 or 4 weeks later, I relocated out to Winnipeg and became the district manager for the company. So I was responsible for the sales and the business and the construction of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Northwestern Ontario projects we're involved in. I did that for 3 years. That area moved to the top level of performance within the country. And it was not the biggest marketplace, but we had the highest level of performance. Howard called me up. He said, "DeWayne, would you mind moving to Calgary?" And I've got Alberta and British Columbia, Yukon, that we need to do the same thing. We need to build up our business inside there. So they relocated me to Calgary. I did the same thing, built the business up at that point. And I was maybe 26 or 27 years old at that point, by far the youngest district manager that the company had. And I got a call from him asking me to come to Toronto because he had a proposition he wanted to make. I had just been married about a year by then. My wife and I had settled into Calgary. We were planning on having a family. We had a home. We loved Calgary. We didn't really want to move from there. And so I suspected he wanted me to relocate someplace. I didn't know where. And so I flew to Toronto and had a meeting with him. And he said, "I'd like you to come back to Toronto and I'd like you to be our national sales manager." I said, "Howard, I'm 27 years old. Everybody that works for me is twice my age. How could I do that?" And he said, "DeWayne, I want you to do that." And I said, "So I have to move back to Toronto?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, can I get back to you?" And he said, "Sure. But only a few days from now, though, because we need to make a decision about this." I went home, talked to my wife about it, and we agreed that we didn't want to leave Calgary, even though that was a great opportunity. So I phoned Howard back on Monday and said, "Howard, can I just stay here? I'm happy here. We're doing well. The business is growing. It has more potential." And he said, "Oh, you don't want to move to Toronto?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Oh." And that was kind of the end of the conversation. And I could read in his tone, "Okay, kid, you're going to probably just rot out there for the rest of your life then if you don't really want to do what I'm asking you to do, because this is really a great opportunity for you." But he didn't understand that we'd already made a decision that was more important. We wanted to stay there and raise our family there, start our family there. So that was kind of the beginning of the end of that employment. I realized that he was going to withdraw from me and just let me wander out there in the world. And I would continue to perform, but I wouldn't be the apple of his eye anymore, and I would have far less potential. And so I decided that I need to find another job. So that's kind of how that.
All right. So again, engineering is dying now for you, at least with this firm. I'll skip ahead a little bit. What went into the construction company that you started with a few partners? How was it built up? And again, what were some transitions for you intellectually, or again, how was this maturing of the idea of traits and Concord coming into play already?
So it was the actual the day-to-day use of my graduate study when I was working in this public company was minimal. We didn't have. There was a human resources department, and they did interviewing, but I was so far removed from those kind of activities and the work that I was doing that I had very little kind of opportunity to to influence them or to ask them what they were doing or suggest they try something different. And this was a large company. There was like thousands of people working in this business. So everybody had their stream that they were in, and they weren't really looking for people to start to expand their stream in any kind of a fashion. So they wanted you to stay in your lane all the time. When I moved to the field and became a district manager, I had a staff that were there. There were distribution facilities, manufacturing facilities. I was responsible for them. Then I became much more involved in sort of, holding people accountable, getting the structure better set up to serve the different markets we were dealing with. Really working hard on job descriptions, because in those areas, guys didn't, the sales reps, when I looked at their job description, it basically said, my job is to sell more every day. That was kind of their job description. And it was like, oh, really? Okay, there's a whole bunch more things we need you to do. And so let's get that detailed. And I started working on those and helped them to get more clear about that. Brought symmetry across the area. So whether you were in Thunder Bay or Saskatoon, you were doing the same kind of activities, even though you were doing it with different companies and clients and marketplaces. So it started to show up there. And I think that was one of the reasons why that district started to increase in its performance, is that we got people much more aligned in what it is they were supposed to be doing every day and more clear about it and accountable for it. And they started to perform accordingly. And then when I went to Alberta and British Columbia and the Yukon, did the same thing. They had exactly the same issues there. So I just brought everything from Manitoba into Calgary and sort of repeated the process, except faster this time, because I realized at that point that this was something that was sort of a common business problem that the company had.
Hmm.
So I had a trip to the Yukon that I had to make to Whitehorse as part of my responsibilities. And so when I was up there, I checked into this hotel, and I said, "Is there any guys from Calgary that are staying in the hotel here this week while I'm here for 3 days?" And the guy at the front desk, he went through his little ledger and he said, "Yeah, there's a guy from Calgary. His name's Andy Clark, and he's staying here for 4 days while you're here for 3 days." And I said, "Well, can I just leave him a little note here?" And so I put a little note together. "Hi, Andy. My name's DeWayne. I'm from Calgary. I'm in the construction business, and if you're free tonight, could we have dinner?" So I put it in his little pigeonhole in the in the hotel message center, and that was on the first night. And the next morning, there's a little note in my box. And the little note said, "Yeah, hi, DeWayne. I'm Andy. I'd love to have dinner with you tonight. Let's meet in the restaurant." So we met that evening, and so Andy became my partner. So he and I and two other guys started this company, this construction company. So I left my employer. He left his. The other two guys who were friends of ours left. We're all in the same age. We're kind of in our early 30s or late 20s. And we decided to relocate to Edmonton. So we set up our business in Edmonton. We all set up individual holding companies. We created a corporate partnership, and we went into business doing commercial industrial construction, building construction. So that was the beginning of our business. We all put $50,000 cash on the table. We sold our home in Calgary and relocated to Edmonton, and I had almost that amount of excess cash, so I used that as my equity investment in the company. And the other guys probably did something similar. None of us had rich parents or inheritances of any kind of. So we started this commercial industrial construction company, and that was in 1980.
Okay.
1980, we started that business.
All right, so you start the business. Now, my understanding is within 10 years, you'd grown it significantly.
Yes.
And maybe touch on that a little bit. But I'm more curious right now about, again, this transition that you were going as the,
Mm.
I'm sure that you're building mental models, right? So you're in engineering, you realize you're not very detailed. You become a manager and you realize, hey, wait a second, I'm really good at creating these systems and then installing these systems into whatever region I'm managing, and they're working really well. Then you get into construction. Construction is booming. What were the aha moments in that decade as you were growing this business that again was building those mental models of personality and fit in an organization?
Yeah, we actually, or I actually went much further than the mental models, but that was the beginning of it. So to just go from the beginning to the end real quickly here. Um, so we started off in our first year and we did $8 million worth of revenue, much to our surprise and probably everybody else's surprise. So there was four partners that were working in the company. We all had our individual jobs. We had about 5 employees working in the office with us, and then we had probably about 10 guys in the field, superintendents and foremen that were overseeing the construction sites for us. So we went from 0 to $8 million in the first 12 months of our business. 10 years later, we were doing $100 million worth of business. We had offices in Edmonton, Whitehorse, Yellowknife, Red Deer, Calgary, Reno, Nevada, Beijing, China, and Yakutsk, Russia. So we became an international construction company working in many barren places. Northern Nevada, we were building mines in the mountains, kind of, and there was no population around for hundreds of miles except our crew building mines in northern Nevada. And same thing in Russia. So how did we? And by then we had about 850 guys working for us in the field, and we probably had about 250 or 300 staff working in these various offices that I just described. So in the second year of our business, we went from $8 million to $20 million. And I decided that we needed to have some kind of a assessment process to help pick better people in our company, and whether they were doing carpentry work, whether they were doing accounting work or engineering work or project manager work, it didn't matter. So I designed a psychometric assessment. So that's the first time it showed up in a kind of a technical, practical way in my
What did it
career.
look like at the time?
Paper and pencil.
So paper and pencil, what questions were you asking? Is it similar to today or?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So it's based on the concept of traits. And so I knew, I understood how to measure traits and the scope of traits. And so I created a word list that was a paper, pencil, check the box or don't check the box kind of a thing. Does this describe you? And a whole bunch of words in a erratic kind of a sequence to them. And I had people go through those. And then I built a template that you would put on top of that would help my assistant to be able to take the results from that and put it into a graphical format for me. And the graphical format is the one that I actually used. And so she would do this with everybody that sent in a resume or before they came in for an interview, kind of, and whether we're hiring carpenters, truck drivers, foremen, superintendents, all the way up to, business development people and all of our office staff. We did it with everybody. And what I realized after I thought about this, when I left the construction company, because this was in our second year, we started hiring carpenters who had higher detail orientation. And the carpenters who were good carpenters but didn't have high detail orientation, we decided that if they had enough assertiveness, we'd make them foremen. And then if they had enough experience and assertiveness, we'd make them superintendents. So we figured out by the people that we knew, first of all, how this actually worked against them. So when we see this guy with no detail, could we see evidence that he forgot about the seismic zone factor, for instance, right? And we said, yeah, we could see that. But you know what? He's a pretty good supervisor. He's a pretty good manager. He can direct people and make sure that they're accountable for what they're supposed to be doing, building it according to the drawings and the specs, so to speak. So we made them a foreman, or we made them a superintendent if they had lots more construction experience.
So you're doing org redesign as you were going.
No, not so much that. That took a little longer to figure out.
Okay. Okay. But I mean,
That was
you're
really
putting the right people in the right places already.
that's what we're doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what we're trying to do is make sure that before we hired a carpenter, that they had the kind of characteristics that were necessary to do that work, right? Or we hired a supervisor, or we hired somebody to do accounting or engineering, that they had the right characteristics to do those kind of jobs. That then really increased our productivity, increased the volume that we're doing, increased the quality of the work, and increased the profitability of the business. So we won on all of those scales, and those people became much more competent employees, and many of them stayed with us for a long time because they understood that we knew them and that we were giving them work that they could do easily and naturally. You didn't have to wake up every day and change who you were to go to do your job. You could just show up and be you, and the work that you had to do every day was how you worked, how you paid attention to things, and
And
how
done
you
at a high
thought.
level.
And done at a high level.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in our third and fourth year, every year the partners, the four of us, would go down to Tahoe, Lake Tahoe, and we would have a strategy session, and I would usually, build the agenda for that and kind of quasi facilitate it, and we'd come back with some goals that we wanted to achieve the next year, and they weren't always just money; they were growth ones. That's how we got into the different geographies and then different kinds of services that we were offering in construction. That all came out of our strategy sessions. And so one of the conversations we had in our, I think, fourth year, took place after we got back from Tahoe, and I came into the office on that Monday morning, and our chief estimator came into my office, like before I even had a chance to get a cup of coffee, and he said, "Okay, DeWayne, what's my job going to be this year?" And I thought, oh, really? Like that's the first question that you have when we've just been and I realized that what we had been doing, primarily me, was coming back from our strategy session and saying, okay, we need somebody to do this, to do this, to do this, to meet our goals. And so I just kept changing people's jobs, not thinking about what the impact on them would be so much. And so when he walked into my office and said that, I realized we created a problem with these people. They loved us and they loved the work they were doing. They weren't wanting to leave, but they were kind of distracted by the fact that every year they'd get some kind of a different job or some expansion of their job in some fashion that they weren't consulted about or had engagement or involvement with. That's when I realized that we needed to organize our business in a different and a better way so that this was not a point of stress for our staff and distraction for our staff. So when we had our fifth year, we had decided that we wanted to be a $80 million business 3 years from then. So I came back from Reno and I sat down in a corner by myself and I designed an org structure for an $80 million business. What we needed to look like to get to 80 million, the new roles we needed to have to get there, the new kinds of activities we needed to do to get there. And by then we had an office in Beijing and we had an office in Russia as well. So we had this international component that was also kind of creating some org structure problems for us. So I built this structure because I said to my partners, that's where we're going. So let's build a structure for where we're going with all the boxes and the titles, and I'll write job descriptions for them at the right time. But this is our plan to get there. And then let's just change ourselves into this rather than having everybody be surprised every year. Let them see this so that they understand where we're going and they can start to see a path for themselves in the organization as their career moves or as their interests become more important for them in terms of what they want to do or try. So that's how I learned that you really needed to be thinking further down the road about your org structure, and it had to be driven by your strategy. It couldn't just be sit down and let's build a nice org structure. No, you have to have some kind of a strategy to drive what that org structure should be. And that's kind of what our fifth year of planning. And the first time we talked about 3 years from now, we had never talked about three. We only just talked about next year. What are we going to do next year? And we had a conversation about 3 years from now, and we agreed we should be hitting 80 million bucks because that's the trajectory we're on. We can do that, and the marketplace is there. We have the competency to do that. We have the people to do that, but we didn't have a structure to do that, and so that was the missing piece for us.
Okay. And that, I mean, that's incredibly important. So you're growing at a very significant pace. You're starting to develop these ideas of what it was strat planning look like 3 years out. How do we need to develop this? How does this affect my staff? What are other significant ideas that came out of that decade of building the construction company that you owned?
Yeah. Excuse me. Probably one of the most important ones was what I'm going to call self-awareness. Very personal for me. I had then clearly understood my traits. I could see them. I tested myself, if you know what I mean. And so I had that understanding of myself. But then in about the 8th year, moving into the 9th year, I started to realize that I was losing some of my motivation for our business and for my work that I did every day. And I couldn't quite understand why. Why is it that I used to be in our office at 7 o'clock or before that every day, and now I'm coming in at 7:30 or 7:45, and to me that's late in the morning. And my wife noticed a little less hop in my step, outside of work, and I was struggling to understand, what is it? I liked my partners. We had a good business. It was very profitable. We were making lots of money. We had lots of good customers. So why am I not feeling motivated? And about the beginning of the 9th year, I realized that the reason I wasn't happy is because my job had changed. My job had gone from being an entrepreneur, starting a business and helping it grow and doing all of the hard work and heavy lifting that comes from going from 0 to 80 or $90 million in that time frame, to becoming a manager. So I was always a vice president. So we all had our own focus. Mine was business development. So I was VP of business development. But on the back of my business card in invisible ink, I also had vice president of HR. So I designed the org structure. I built the compensation plans. I did all of the performance evaluation systems and made sure they were being used throughout the organization. So those were sort of my lunch hour projects besides my business development daily focus on it. And what I realized was that my job had changed to one of being a manager every day. So a lot of the infrastructure was in place already. We had job descriptions, we had roles, we had compensation, incentive programs, we had performance management systems, we had opportunity for people to expand and grow their authority and responsibility in our org structure. But I wasn't getting motivated every day. And the reason I discovered was because on a good day, I was just an average manager. And I didn't understand that about me. I didn't understand that on a good day, I'm just an average manager. Not a bad manager, but just an average one. It didn't motivate me to be a manager. And I didn't realize how hard that was on me. So about halfway through the 9th year, I took my partners out for lunch and I said, guys, I'm leaving the business. I need to leave the business and go find something else to do. And so they,
How did they take it?
well, they were surprised because I had said nothing about it. I didn't show them or tell them that I was not as motivated. They may have picked something up, but I didn't detect that from their response to it. And they said, well, what is it that you don't like? And I said, I don't like managing. I'm not a good manager, and I don't like managing. Well, DeWayne, you're great business development. Like 60% of our revenue comes from stuff that you do through negotiated construction. Why don't you do that every day? And I said, well, who's going to be my boss? You want an employee to be my boss? And would that employee want to be my boss? Who wants to manage me? And I said, I can't do that. And like an employee would just be so uncomfortable having to manage a partner in the companies. And I said, it's not fair to them, and it's awkward, and I might not listen to them. So there's no way for me to stay here. I can't go and do another job. Nobody will want to manage me. There's no projects that I can do offline that are just going to be things that I can focus on. Everything that I could make a contribution to is in place already. I designed all the negotiation processes and design, build, and construction management, and various forms, various vehicles for delivering construction services. I designed those. We had systems. Everybody was using them, and they're still using them today, as a matter for that matter. So there's nothing for me to do here anymore, guys. I need to leave. We had a really good partnership agreement. We had a buy-sell arrangement. We had a process for business evaluation, and so we put that in place, and it took 4 or 5 months to kind of get all of that calculated to find out, what my equity portion was. And I left a couple months into the 10th year, and I promised them that before I left, I would find somebody to do my job that was a manager. Maybe somebody that was in the company today, or maybe somebody that wasn't in the company today, but was a senior construction executive. And I found a guy in Calgary, relocated him to Edmonton because Edmonton was our corporate office at that time, and he retired 10 years ago. So he was the right guy for the job, and he was a really good manager, and took over the management part of it. He never became a partner, but he was a really good executive, and took on the title of vice president, and had that when he retired from the company many years later. So so that worked out well for me because I was now able to go and do what I wanted to do. And then when I had 2 years of I retired. I didn't really need to work anymore, and so I decided that we would build a house, and so we built a new family home, and I was project manager for that. And then I sat in my newly built library, and I started to think about, what is it that I really liked in the last 10 years of my career? What is it that was most motivating to me? What was it that I really was most excited about and felt I had the best contribution for? And right at the top of that list would have been business development, because I really came up with some neat systems and neat approaches to negotiate construction that became a large portion of what we did, and was the most profitable work that we did as well. So that was one thing, was business development. So I knew that whatever I did in the future needed to have some kind of business development, not engineering component to it. And then the second thing that I thought about was all of this work that I put into assessing people, and how we grew so consistently from to 850 guys in the field and 350 people in the office. We're over 1,000 employees, and every one of them went through this assessment process, and how that over a period of 8 years just built a powerful business machine, a powerful construction company, and one that had lots of repeat business, lots of negotiated business with no competition, because our performance and our results were there, and our credibility was there from previous and existing clients. So I realized that was way more important to our business than I even thought it was, and certainly more important than our partners, because none of them had this kind of academic background. They just realized that this was working really, really well, and were entirely supportive of it. But for me, that was the recognition that that's something that was unique in our business that we did, compared to other construction companies that were the same size as we did, but didn't have anywhere near as much of the negotiated work, and nowhere near the kind of profitability that we had. So I realized that that was a really valuable part of any kind of an enterprise that I would want to be involved in from that point on in whatever I did next in my career.
It's interesting because, I mean, we're going to talk about traits. We're going to really focus on traits in the next episode here again, we've got about 4 or 5 episodes that we're producing here. But I want to follow up on just a couple of things that you mentioned earlier. One was Dr. Peters. And I've read one book. I don't know how many books he's written, but the theme that comes out of that book often, the way I think about it, I'm sure I've paraphrased it from someone who's said it better, but something along the lines of we tend to promote to the highest level of incompetency. Share more about that, just for a couple of moments here. That where I'm coming from here is that you notice this for yourself in various
Yes.
ways.
Yes.
You talked about how on your best day you're an okay manager. So you've noticed it yourself in some ways. I'm sure that you saw it in many ways as you were hiring and as you were promoting in different ways. But yeah, maybe just talk about that for a moment, and we'll use that as a segue into the next episode.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So Dr. Lawrence was a brilliant man and a really important person in my life for a variety of reasons. And this book that he was writing that I had done a couple of pieces of important research for him on, he glued it all together with some other material, and he created this book called the Peter Principle. His last name was Peter, Dr. Lawrence Peter, and yeah, the summary of it, if you could take that book and sort of put it down into one sentence, it's: in an organizational environment, people tend to rise to their level of incompetency. That was the essence, the theme of his book. In an organizational environment, people tend to rise to their level of incompetency. So what that meant was that organizations had been trained to reward people's performance for the job they were doing. So if you were a really good engineer, we would make you an engineering supervisor. And if you were a really good engineering supervisor, we would make you an engineering manager. And then if you were a really good engineering manager, we'd make you the vice president of engineering. So somewhere in that journey, you would find that person was a really good engineer, and as a supervising engineer, so as an engineer, they may have been an 8 or a 9 on a 10-point scale of performance and capability and competency. They moved him to an engineering supervisor, and that score may have gone down to 7 or 7.5, but still above average. Then they moved him to an engineering manager, and that score went down to 6 or maybe 5. So now they see where that person has actually been promoted beyond their capabilities and beyond their competency. But it wasn't because they didn't understand engineering. It wasn't because they weren't a good engineer. It wasn't because they didn't understand the products and the services and the systems and the materials that their company was using. They were experts in all of those areas. What was it that would take them from an 8 or a 9 to a 5 or 6? And invariably, the answer became their nature. Their nature didn't change, even though their job description changed. And so at some point, their nature started to work against them rather than for them, where their body of knowledge as an engineer was their ticket for promotion, their value in the organization, and the organization wanted to honor that value by giving them more responsibility and more compensation and more authority, not understanding that at some point that person might have reached beyond their capability to do whatever that next level job was. And so in the world all around us, decades ago when this research was being done, and today we see that still happening in organizations, they're promoting people beyond their capability, beyond their competency. And the idea here is that jobs change as you move up an organizational structure or even across an organizational structure, but people don't change. And so organizations need to understand at what point is this person going to have some risk of incompetency in doing a job, and that's not going to be good for them. And they may not have the option that DeWayne had. DeWayne didn't have to work, so he could go and do whatever he wanted to, but most people don't have that option. They have to work. And so what pain and stress are they going to incur, and what harm might they do unintentionally to the organization because they are over their head, because they are beyond their competency. And so now something has to be done to them. Whereas I put my hand up and said, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
I don't like this and I'm not good at it. I don't want to spend the rest of my life being average. I need to get out of here. And so that was a conscious choice I made, but lots of people don't have the ability to make that choice.
I think I want to share an anecdote just as we finish this before we get into more of a traits discussion in our next episode. But I've got a friend in Calgary. He's worth $1 billion. He is a brilliant business person. And he says to me consistently when it comes to coaching and mentorship, he said, would you rather, if you wanted to learn how to golf, would you rather have Tiger Woods coach you, or would you rather have Tiger Woods as coach? And the idea being that there are some people who are phenomenal at something and not even passable at another thing that we think that they might be good at. It comes to mind that sales staff, you've got a high performing salesperson, and so you promote them into mentoring all the other sales staff, and sometimes it's a good fit, but sometimes we know it's a terrible fit because they're not a teacher, they're not a mentor, they're not a manager, they're a great salesperson. So let them be happy with what they're great at in some ways. And this individual is a brilliant business person. He's a brutal coach or a mentor. He's a fantastic human being. It's not taking away from who he is. It's not taking away from his skill set or what he's done. He has a very unique skill set that was able to develop a business in unique ways and is not able to do other things. And that plays a role in my mind, DeWayne, as I've gotten to know you, as I've gotten to know Concord and when worked with organizations. I'm reminded over and over again, it does not take away from somebody that they're not a fit in a certain place in an organization. They can be phenomenal at certain things, and we, as all of us are, we can just be passable or not very good at other things. Like you said, a 4 or a 5, where we end up sometimes. One quick thing, just before we take off. Howard Dutton, what was the relationship with him? Years later, you left the organization. Did you still have a relationship with Mr. Dutton?
Oh yeah. Howard. Before I fully understood something about me, he did, and he recognized that there's something in this kid that is beyond just engineering and being an engineer, and I want that to be useful to our business and a better fit for him. So he saw that potential inside me before I saw that potential inside me. So when I said to him, "What's a district manager?" he laughed, and he said, "I'll help you with that, DeWayne. I think you'll be able to do that kind of." But I want to just come back for a moment to something that you just finished saying here. If you went back into libraries 50 or 60 years ago, and you looked for self-help books, there weren't very many. Maybe you'd find a book on, building a deck, or maybe you'd find a book on, growing certain kinds of flowers in certain kinds of soil and certain kinds of environments. And so you could learn how to be a little better gardener, or you could learn how to be a little better carpenter or something like that. But there weren't a lot of 50 or 60 years ago, there weren't a lot of self-help books in the marketplace. So the population, the world, our culture was not thinking about those kinds of things, or they were in a very small, very focused kind of a way. If you go to a bookstore today, or you go to even a university library today, and you ask for the self-help, where's the self-help books? There's a Barnes and Noble store that my wife and I frequent when we're in Palm Desert, and now I remember going there for the first time, and it's a very large store, and saying, "Where's the self-help books?" And the guy said, "Well, about what?" And he said, "You see that row there? Just follow all the way down there. Those are all the self-help books." It's like aisles and aisles of self-help books. So today in our culture, and probably for the last, I think, 25, 35 years, you can get a book on, do you want to be a better person? Well, there's a whole bunch of books. Do you want to be a better salesman? Well, there's a whole bunch of better books. You want to be a better manager? Well, there's a whole bunch of books. So this idea today of self-awareness is in a very different place than it was when I was educated in understanding human psychology and human behavior and how we're wired and how we're built. And today, we have within our society this prevalence of, well, just read about it and you can do this too. Just go take a course and you can do this too. And you can become better at doing this, even though you're average at it today. But here's how you can become above average at it. So we have a bit of a delusion within our society, I think, partly because of self-help gurus who are really good at doing something and they write prolifically about it. And the other part of it is universities. Universities are saying to students regularly, well, you can be whatever you want to be. And so just study hard, work harder, and get better marks, and you can be whatever you want to be. So we've created a society in many ways in North America, for sure, probably beyond, where people have this illusion or maybe even belief that if they work hard enough or read hard or study enough, that they can become proficient at doing something. And it is a key component. You can't be an engineer unless you pay the price of engineering education. But to become a chief engineer is very, very different than being a design engineer. And so the difference between them has little to do with technical knowledge and a huge amount to do with how you're hardwired, what your nature is, what your personality is. And that's what really separates those two jobs, not their engineering knowledge. That's a secondary one, but important, but not the primary reason for why you'll be good at a chief engineer role or manager of engineering role.
Yeah, I think it's difficult, I think, for a lot of people to understand that I can't do management or I can't do things as a director that other people will be able to do. I always think about like a sports analogy of going, I'm 6 feet tall. I'm not going to make the NBA. It doesn't matter how much I want it. I'm not going to make the NBA. And it's not just my height. It's also my skill set in different ways. And it's also my age. I'm 46. I'm not going to, I can't turn back the clock. Right. And there are certain parameters that we have that when I say that, it's common sense. And yet we still have this belief, as you mentioned, that we can kind of do anything if we just put our minds to it, or we get the right coaching, or we get the right mentorship. We're going to talk about that again, I'm sure, a couple of times. And maybe I'll just address the audience here. I'm saying, so this episode 1, we're going to probably have 4 or 5 episodes here. We're really focusing on, again, higher performing organizations. We're going to talk about traits as a tool and psychometric assessments in general. And then we are going to move into kind of a story of 2 different size companies and what those companies look like, what their needs are, and how to get so much more out of those organizations. As you've heard, Dwayne's talked about his experiences and all the practical knowledge that he was gaining and then putting into practice in those companies. But I'm really excited to see how that will play out for an organization that you're in, or organizations that you know, and how much help this will provide for you as you grow as well. So again, thank you for this, Dwayne. I appreciate this.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.